Thank you so much for tuning back into the Closure House. It's your host, Jessica, and this week we share Diana's story. It's one of courage, respect, and reclaiming peace after emotional mistreatment. After enduring repeated disappointment from her now ex boyfriend, Diana made the powerful decision to go no contact. And when he finally reached out, his words sounded like an apology, but his actions told another story. So in this episode, Diana reflects on what it means to stand firm in your boundaries and to choose yourself, even when the apology isn't genuine. So, Diana, thank you so much for being here today. Tell me a little bit more about your no contact journey.
Well, my journey of no contact, I remember I had to do a lot of research and there was a lot of, it felt good to finally figure out what it was. And it was just such a relief because when people go through narcissistic abuse, it feels so isolating because every day, they're not like that every day. I came up with this saying, an abusive is not an abusive 24/7. It's there's that, break in between. Sometimes it would last for days, sometimes it would be months. I remember at one point I got that aura that the next narcissistic rage burst was gonna come, and kinda either had to just let it ride through like a hurricane or take myself out of it.
Yeah. So, for the listeners, tell me a little bit about who you went no contact with.
It was my ex. We were together for 3 years from 2008 to 2011. When I first met him, Um, I was studying to become a nurse. I was going to the LPN training, and I remember trying to piece together how he came in because, I kept my life so guarded, so focused on my school, so focused on my kid, and I was trying to figure out how did he slip in like that? And I dwelled on it for, like, several years, and I thought, like, "Okay," and I came to the conclusion this guy was planning my demise since we met, you know?
Yeah.
It seems like because then next thing you know, I'm noticing where I had a decent relationship with my neighbors, all of a sudden, my neighbors hated me according to him, and I was like, "Why? I did nothing to them." But he was also going over to my neighbor's house and talking about me, and then they were allegedly saying stuff about me, and it kept this, like, whole triangulation thing of turning everybody against each other to where I couldn't go to for help.
Yeah, that smear campaign can be tumultuous. It literally, the seeds that they plant, the way that they grow over time is just hard to even understand.
Yeah, and, I remember, for when I got out, like, when I finally left back in June in 2011, I remember going through it seems like every single emotion hits you at once. One minute, you're happy to be out of that situation or relieved. Next minute, you're angry, and if that person was standing in front of you, you wanna take their head off and be done with it, and then you go into depression, and then you go it's just this constant back and forth, and I'm kinda rambling on right now, I will admit, because it's the first time actually talking on a podcast like this, but I remember, um 'cause I actually my daughter was safe with relatives, and I moved, like, 3 hours away from our little hometown in Ohio with my uncle, and that was a relief because he was out in the middle of nowhere, like, he was in the holler, as, us Ohioans call it, and, so I had no cell phone service. He had a small homestead, so I had to help with animals. And I could go out he had a trail dug out in his woods, and I could go out and walk that trail all I wanted, and that helped with the healing process. Because for one, my ex had no way to contact me, and after a few months, I blocked him on social media after leaving, and it kinda gave me that chance to process everything that I went through.
Yeah, and when you went through how did he slip in, what have you come up with?
Well, for one thing, he basically mirrored everything. Like, I'm sitting there, I'm studying for an exam, and he comes over. I actually lived in, Section 8 housing when we got together. My brother, I actually met him through my younger brother, that was hanging out at a friend of his house, which was my ex's flying monkey, and I remember, um, you know, my ex asking my brothers like, "Hey, I'd like to meet your sister." So he came over, he started talking, and looking back, the guy did an old bait and switch. He did. Yeah, like he mirrored the same views, same values, same interest. And looking back, he would not let me get a word in edgewise. Like he was trying to sell me something right away. And I'm thinking, wow, he had a really good sales tactic for how he was.
Yeah.
And then I would say about uh, 3 to 6 months into the relationship, we had already moved in together. And then the control started with just like little things, from how I was raising my kid to the meals I cooked to the relationship with my family, and he gradually just wore those down. And, 6 months, it was like within full-blown control. Now, what people don't tell you is that those few months, again, they've laid the groundwork completely. They've eroded you down, and you've seen where they can be a decent human being. You've seen where they can be a total monster. And what I learned was I wanted that decent human being to come back, the one that I met back in April 2008. The guy that, you know, appreciated me for my mind, appreciated that I was working towards something and, loved me, loved my daughter. And one of the hardest things to accept was it was all fake.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all fake. And I remember how many times over the years with recovering, how many times I beat myself up. And I remember, you know, the guilt and the shame. And, I got in with a really good counselor back in 2016. And she gave me some great grounding techniques to manage the CPTSD symptoms. I'm not a big fan of taking medications. I think they dull. I've had bad experiences with them, and I think they dull a lot of things and don't allow you to process them properly. But I had to go back and I had to do a lot of detective work to find the clues I missed.
Well, yeah, somebody's pretending to be a completely different person. Now you realize that person didn't exist. And now you have to grieve the life you thought you were going to have, the person that he never was, the person he showed you that you thought you were getting. Like, this is so deep. That's what I think people miss about
Yeah.
narcissistic abuse.
And this is not just a bad relationship. I've had bad relationships before where you were just two different people going different directions. This isn't just a bad relationship. This is pure psychological warfare that you're going through. And I remember trying to explain that to people. And I said, look, you don't know the gravity of it. This wasn't just, he was this was because even an can be empathetic and a decent person. They just have their moments like we all do.
Yeah.
But this was just downright deception, manipulation, gaslighting, emotional abuse, mental abuse. There were even times where there was like sexual coercion with our relationship. And I remember, looking back and even when I left and processed through the emotions of what happened and looking back and piecing it together, I got angry again. Like, how did I miss this? And I'm thinking, and I was angry with myself mostly because how did I let this get that far? And I was trying to wrap my brain around it. And, you know, I had to go back and say, okay, this is where he slipped in. This is where the mask fell off, and just tell myself, and I had to remind myself, I was hoping for that person I met to come back. And you have to, and that was, like I said, one of the hardest things to admit that, he was a mirage. He wasn't real.
Yeah. But it's hard to say somebody isn't real when you've experienced them that way. It's like
Yeah,
unless you know the tactics, you'd never assume somebody would do something like that.
exactly. And that's why it's so hard to get over because it is so deep rooted inside. I remember one minute I was the best thing that ever happened to him. The next minute I was getting called the C word. I was getting told how lazy, worthless, and fat and ugly I was getting. And I was just like, well, make up your mind. Which is it? Am I that horrible to be with? You can walk out that door anytime. And yeah, I would have been upset. But then again, I would look at it and say, well, at least I don't have to deal with him anymore. And that's how it got to the point where, and I would have to say every time there was a discard phase between us, when that discard would come up, I was secretly hoping that this would be the final discard. This will be where he leaves, he goes back to his grandma who enabled him, or he goes and gets together with the person I know he cheated on me with and just finally leaves me alone and let me have my peace. I would just secretly hope that.
That process becomes such a cycle that it's just disappointing.
It gets old after a while,
Yeah.
and I mean, there were times, like, especially towards the end, I basically had to become indifferent towards him. I mean, the times that for attention, he would threaten to delete himself from this world. The first couple of times, "Don't do that. Think of everyone that you'll be leaving behind and who you hurt." Till towards the end, when he said, "I'm just going to delete myself from this world," I finally just looked at him, I said, "Then do the world a favor then." And that's kinda sad because, personally, Jessica, I never thought I would get that way towards someone. But after the 3 years of gaslighting, manipulation, emotional abuse, mental abuse, sexual coercion, and it got physical between us quite a few times, I was just done. I was just, thinking, "If you're gonna do this, just go do it." Save everyone the heartache.
Yeah, and think about what it takes to even get to that point. So, like, years, this is just you asked, you're like, "How did I let this happen?" And I think that's the biggest question everybody asks themselves.
Yeah, and that's what, outsiders don't really understand that have never experienced this. I would never wish this type of abuse on anyone, not even my worst enemy, because it is so insidious and it just eats at you every day. And not only the anger towards them, but the anger towards yourself, and that's what the anger towards them eventually passes, but the anger towards yourself, that sticks with you. And I know this sounds kind of strange, but I would have rather it had been just physical between us. I would rather have been in a body cast or in the ICU. That takes less time to recover than having a broken mind.
I think that most people that have dealt with narcissistic abuse can relate to that because at least you know it's happening.
Yeah.
With flying monkeys, triangulation, all the things that happen, you're constantly guessing like, am I overreacting? Is it me? Am I the narcissist? Am I doing something wrong? Am I the problem? Should I do more? Like, there's nothing physically while everybody else tells you this isn't happening to you. It's not that deep or,
Yeah.
whatever. So at least with physical abuse, you're like, I can see it.
Yeah.
So that's where the mind goes.
Yeah. I mean, people can see a black eye or a broken arm or, a bruise on your back where you got shoved into a wall. They don't see the mental scarring. And I remember it dawned on me, like, one day, I went over to the neighbor lady across from me. I was actually, friends with her. We worked at a local diner together. She pulls me aside and said I go over to borrow some butter from her, and she pulls me aside and she says, "You don't act like yourself." You know, when you, because usually, even if during the day, I always made sure that I had on decent clothes, might not have been the fanciest, but I always, looked cleaned up a little bit too, even when going down to the mailbox. And she says, "Diana, you look so tired and haggard. You have your head down. You don't fix your hair anymore. You don't do your makeup. What is going on?" So she picked it up right away, like, there's something other going on. We do hear the fights, but what's really going on? And then I remember, there were times like, and I wouldn't say a word about what was going on, but he would always accuse me of going over to the neighbor's house and talking about him, telling people that telling him that he was abusive and that I was being beaten, and I wasn't saying a word.
Yeah.
They A lot of the people around us, aside even his own flying monkey who knew what was going on and instigating a lot of it, they were the ones talking about it. And I wasn't saying a word.
Every accusation is a confession when you're dealing
Yeah.
with a narcissist. So everything that they accuse you of, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and, I was keeping my mouth shut. I wasn't going over to my neighbors or anything. I barely even talked to them. I got along with them. I wasn't gonna be rude to them if I saw them, but for the most part, I kept to myself.
But he was convinced that that wasn't what was happening, that you were
Yeah,
going talking about him.
yeah, and I'm like, "I'm not saying a word. Either they are seeing what's going on and I'm completely blinded to the fact, or you're giving yourself away. Which is it?"
Yeah.
And one of the things, it was like he gave himself away and he didn't even know it. He thought he was hiding it and doing a good job of it. And people figured him out right away. And I don't hate him. I'm not bitter towards him. I'm basically more indifferent towards him. And I do talk about it. I know people have gotten on to me. His um his sister follows my TikTok page, and I did get along with his family, you know, and that was it. But even she's like, "You're dwelling on the past and everything else." I'm like, and I said, "You know what? I'm not really dwelling on it. I'm using that relationship as an experience to share and to kind of relate to whoever comes across these videos to make it, because I know you can go and talk to a counselor all you want to. And I find that quite a few counselors are not too familiar with narcissistic abuse. It's like a whole new thing, and I almost think there should be a class on it to
There
say,
is.
"There is?"
The disconnect, honestly, is that narcissists don't come to counseling.
Yeah,
So there's like you learn about it, but unless you dive into it, like I study it,
yeah,
unless you dive into it, you would never really encounter or experience it yourself, right? Because that's going to
yeah,
be the best lesson,
yeah,
unfortunately. But
yeah,
they don't know. They only know, it's like there's a lot of other diagnoses that are the same, but for narcissism, it's one of the most challenging because they show you everything you want to see in relationships, that mirroring. They
yeah,
do the same thing when they're mandated to come to counseling. So
yeah.
it always looks like everyone else is the problem, especially if they end up in like couples counseling.
Lord, yeah, I can't imagine if I did couples counseling with my ex. That would have been like a nightmare altogether. I guess, with that experience, I mean, I really had to do that deep dive because even though I had some good counselors, they weren't quite familiar with the gravity of it. So I had to go in and I joined Facebook groups from people that had those similar experiences. I've watched YouTube videos. I've read books. I've read Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft, which is basically the Bible of narcissistic abuse. And I've read about other books about narcissistic abuse. I've read blogs. I've done my research. And the thing is with narcissistic abusers, it's not a one size fits all. They're not always going to act grandiose or malignant. Sometimes they're going to be covert, they're going to be communal. And that's why we don't really get such a broad picture of it, because it's so funny because my ex encapsulated all of those at any given time. I remember whenever he would make a new friend that he was trying to get something off of, you couldn't ask for the most giving, helpful, kind person. And then behind closed door, he went from that to Satan.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, what happened to that guy 5 minutes ago that was talking to the new friend he was trying to make? What happened? What was the switch?
Yeah. So you spend so much time, and this is something that therapists should be more aware of. Like the victim, survivor, spends so much time just trying to figure out what's happened. Even years later, you're still coming up with like, oh my goodness, this may have happened or that happened. Maybe I was the problem here. Maybe I should have done this, or it was him and I thought it was me then. It is so confusing that they should definitely have more knowledge about how to manage that.
Yeah, and it's putting together the pieces of a puzzle and finding where the pieces fit. And, from strangers, if I tell strangers about this story, I've actually had a lot of sympathy from people that come across my video that say, "Hey, I went through the same thing." But I would say the hardest people to understand what you went through are family members, especially like on my mom's side of the family. My aunts, two of them, they never married or had kids. The one, she was married twice, and both of those marriages didn't work out. My mom had been married like 3 times, and, those marriages all ended in divorce. So when we were talking about it one day, one of the things that she loves to throw out is, "You took psychology, you should have known the abuse." And I'm sorry, that's what her voice sounds like in my head. I mean, it is. That very condescending tone. And I took a psychology class in high school as an elective.
Yeah, they definitely didn't spell out
Yeah.
narcissistic abuse and all the types.
Yeah. Yeah, and for your degree, since you're a licensed counselor, you went and you took psychology courses. You also had to take some other in-depth courses with abnormal psychology probably,
Mhm.
and, personality disorders. And, you go further into that field where my little elective class only covered theories of personalities, Freud.
Right. It's all the surface level stuff that
Yeah,
I also want you to know that that's how we were taught as well. Like there was a lot of surface level stuff.
yeah,
Counselors really have to continue to research
yeah,
because
'cause
it's not easy to grasp.
and I actually pointed it out to my mom and saying, Mom, that course only covered how personalities developed and the different approaches. It didn't cover, personality disorders, abnormal psychology. I mean, it would have been cool if it did. I think my one teacher would have been like, "Look, if I had the time to teach it this way, I would,"
Right.
But he didn't. He could only do the surface level stuff.
Right. And that's full in this space. But it sounded like she was blaming you.
Yeah, pretty
Why didn't you
much.
know better?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, once you're an adult doesn't mean you know better. I mean, I also came up with this saying that wisdom is knowledge and experience in action. And that's true because, yeah, you can have the knowledge, but no experience. You could have the experience, but not have the knowledge.
Right.
Wisdom and experience, wisdom, basically, knowledge and experience is what makes wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah. I love that. You need them both.
Yeah. And I looked right at her, because my mom, when she divorced my dad, decided she was going to go back to college and take psychology. She only did 2 semesters of it and it fizzled out. I got to the point whenever she starts in like that, I was like, "So, how did you manage to earn your degree with only 2 semesters of psychology?" And she kinda gives me that side eye, like, "How dare you say that?" And I'm like, "Well,
It's like rolling the ball back. Right.
yeah, like, facts." But, I mean, this is also the same woman 'cause, I remember, like, 3 months into relationship with my ex, I ended up with a UTI that actually spread to my kidneys, and then it spilled over into my bloodstream. Yeah, and I was pretty sick, and I was in the hospital for, like, a week, till that cleared out of my system, and, I looked at my mom tried to sit there and say since I was studying to become a nurse, that was like, "Well, you were studying to become a nurse, you should have known the signs." I'm thinking, first off, we didn't even cover the urinary tract system and problems with that. Second, the week prior to that, I just thought I pulled something in my back. And, because I helped my uncle with some bags of feed. And if you've ever lifted bags of feed, it's about 50 pounds a bag. So I thought I just moved wrong and pulled something. And, again, I had a hard time emptying out my bladder, and I was just like and she just actually brought that up, like somehow that was my fault.
Yeah.
And then I actually asked my nursing instructor about, what went on because she said, "Yeah, you'll be surprised how common that is with nurses having kidney infections because they can't go to the bathroom anytime they want."
Yeah.
And she said she had one too, and she thought she just pulled a muscle lifting a patient wrong.
Wow.
And I told her about what I said about what my mom said, and, she almost had that look of, like, she wanted to call my mom up and tell her she was an idiot. And, even I explained, 'cause, my uncle that I went to go move down to Southern Ohio with was a nurse, up until he passed back in 2015. I told him the signs and symptoms and said, I just thought I pulled something to my back helping you." And he was like, "Yeah, that's pretty common." But I mean, I'll go on about that. That's just like an example of what my mom tried to use with knowledge. But I would have to say the worst judge was my own mother.
Yeah.
And that's pretty sad because your mom is supposed to be in your corner no matter what. And yeah, she couldn't stand my ex from the get-go, and she would do things deliberately to poke the bear, pretty
Uh,
much.
can you tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about that? Like, what did you notice?
Well, I mean, my ex, he worked like 12-hour shifts, okay? And on his day off, because I just had a regular desktop PC in my bedroom. And on his day off, you're working 12-hour shifts. You just want to sleep for a day, just get your body rested. And, she said, "Hey, I want to go back and check something on the computer." And while he was laying down, trying to sleep, trying to get some rest, she's playing music on YouTube.
Like, out loud?
Yeah. And I was like, and I looked at her and said, "Mom, he worked like 3 days back to back, 12-hour shifts. Can you turn the music off?" And I asked her nicely. And then finally, after that point, I looked right at her and said, "Mom, turn that music off now." And then she turns it off. She gives me that hurt look on her face like you just hurt a little kid, goes off for a couple of hours, and just cools down a little bit, and then, when my ex was awake, he went over to his flying monkey across the hall's place for a little bit. She comes up, "Why did you yell at me like that?" And I was like, "Mom, if someone came in trying to do that to you while you were trying to sleep, would you like that?" So she would for someone that was worried about how dangerous he was, she wasn't helping the situation by poking the bear.
Yeah. What do you think now that what's happening with her?
I think a lot of it was because for a while she was staying her and my little brother, before my brother moved in with my dad, was staying with me. I think and then, like, 2 years prior to that, her 3rd husband left her. Basically, he went over to his sister's house to fix her car but never came back. Kind of like the equivalent of the dad going out for a pack of cigarettes and leaving, that sort of thing he pulled on her. And I think with my mom, they had just gotten kicked out of their place because a few months prior to that, she lost her driver's license due to not updating her registration. And, she eventually got it back, but by that time, she was unable to maintain employment and they got kicked out of her place. So her and my brother were staying with me for a little bit until they were able to get somewhere, move somewhere else. I don't know if deep down inside, if she saw my ex as moving in on her spot or her territory, or if maybe it was just her own loneliness, and resentment, towards her husband. Like, I really can't say what was going on through her mind. But I remember, she tried to say the first day she met my ex, she didn't like him, and I'm thinking, you're really full of,"
Yeah.
and
You didn't even know him.
yeah, you didn't even know him. And she would always pull that, "Well, you should have listened to me when I told him you should get rid of him." And I was just like, "Okay, first off, you were living in my place, okay? My place, my rules. Second, I was 25 years old at the time. You don't tell your 25-year-old daughter what to do. You don't try and rule over her."
In her place. I mean,
Yeah.
you're grown up, it's
Yeah.
that's a weird dynamic, so I can see
Yeah.
why even that's confusing, but there is one parallel that I saw, was, like, she beat you down about what you should have known, and then you spent some time beating yourself down about what you
Yeah.
should have known
Oh,
because that's
yeah.
probably the voice you were used to.
Yeah, and I remember also, I'll get into that a little bit later, but it's also, because I think, with the fact, I think, I don't know if she thought she was being replaced. She wanted to talk about my choices in partners. And
You failed relationships, makes it kinda
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it makes it kind of hard to really judge somebody about their choices, and I even told myself this flat out that if my daughter is ever in that situation or if I get a funny feeling about the guy, I'm not going to sit there and demand and give her an ultimatum of get rid of him or else, but I'm going to sit there and say, "Hey, I'm noticing this and I don't like it." And I'm going to keep that line of communication open with her. I'm not gonna tell her what to do or make demands, but I'm gonna sit there and say, "Look, I'm noticing this and I don't like it. It seems like it's moving a little too fast for you. You might I mean, my best advice would be slow it down." And yeah, and just kind of leave that door open for her because I know you try to tell a grown adult to do something, there's gonna be that mentality that is still 15 years old of, "You're not gonna tell me what to do."
Exactly. And, I think that that's an important thing to remember too, while people are continuously blaming and like, you should have made a different choice or I told you something was wrong. Many times it's not very spelled out. But when
Yeah.
you were talking to your neighbor, she's telling you like real facts, things that are tangible that you can
Yeah,
hold on to. Like, you're not doing this, you're not getting dressed, you're not doing your hair. Like, what is happening to you?
yeah,
She noticed.
yeah, and she said, "You have your head down a lot, like you're ashamed of something."
Whoa. She really
Yeah,
noticed.
and I mean, me and this girl, we worked together at a diner, and we knew each other for several years and was a friend of mine, and she pointed that out. And I remember what really dawned on me was I stayed friends with my one stepsister with a lady that my dad was married to for a couple of years. And she got a hold of my number and we spent the afternoon talking. And I opened up to her what was going on. And she was like, I just got out of the situation too, and I know what it's like. And we're talking like this was my stepsister, and she actually became one of my friends, even though she was like several years younger than me. And we still talk and everything too. And she was telling me, said, "Look, my ex beat me up so badly. I was 4 months pregnant and I lost a baby." And she was like, "This isn't going to get any better. You need to get out." And I grew up in a religious household too. My mom and dad are both Christians, and I remember towards the end of the relationship, I was praying for protection, and for a while it worked. Okay, I personally think that God will remove just a little bit of protection, not to the point where you're gonna end up dead, but to the point to show you this is what's going on. And it's not so much as, I don't wanna say a burning bush like with Moses, but it's enough to sit there and jolt you into reality.
Yeah, it's almost like that conviction that if I don't make a decision here, I may not make it out of here.
Yeah. And I remember that moment it happened. Towards the end of the relationship, he worked an under the table job. And you know how well those usually go. You're lucky if you get your full week's pay, unless you have like a really honest businessman. And I remember the one afternoon he came home, it was an all out war. Like we were arguing, we were fighting, we were screaming at each other to the point where the neighbors could hear us. And I remember, he didn't like what I fixed for dinner. And so unintentionally, we had a heavy duty stoneware plate. I threw the food in the trash and I slammed the plate down in the sink and it broke. Well, anyway, I walk away. He grabs me from behind and puts me in a headlock to the point where he's ready to choke me out. Like, I thought I was gonna die. It didn't take until the neighbors next to us, the neighbors diagonal to us, beating down the door, basically to try and get in there.
Wow. So they heard everything that was happening and then they just show up beating the door down and then what happened?
Well, finally, let's go, and I finally gasp for air, and I hear, "Bam, bam, 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 bam," and I'm thinking, "Shit, it's the cops." And then, I open the door, I see, the neighbors right next to us, and I see the people that live diagonal to us. He's right behind me. They pull me out of the apartment, and the one big dude, and he wasn't the type you really wanted to mess with. This was a guy who he was in his mid-50s. He did time in prison for, I think, second or third degree murder in Texas, of all places. And he did not tolerate any of that, and he got in my ex's face and was ready to snap him in half. And then finally, when the cops were called, the cops came over and said, "Look, either one of you has to leave or I have to take you to jail." So so my ex left, went over to his grandma's to cool down. And he came back like 3, 4 hours later, and he was just didn't say a word, just went to the back bedroom. And I had that epiphany, and I'm thinking, I'm gonna end up dead, I'm gonna end up either stabbed or beaten to death by him. So, about a month or so later, we get into it again really bad. And, by that point, everyone knew what he did prior with basically having me in that chokehold, like he was either trying to snap my neck or choke me out or what. And but it was me and him. I was talking to a friend of his that I always talk to, and me and him got into it so bad that he knocked the bowl of ramen noodles off of my hand and some of it splashed in my face and the bowl went flying across the room. And he was telling me something along the lines of, "You don't talk to my friends when they're over here, you go away." And I'm thinking, "Excuse me? My place. I am not a child that needs to just go to their room while the adults talk. This is
Yeah.
my home." And then we're shouting back and forth, and the one neighbor guy came up and checked on me and said and then, he went to the bathroom or something, and he goes, "Are you okay?" And I was just like, "I don't know what I'm gonna do." And then, my ex is giving me the look like, "Don't you talk to him," and
Right.
just
That
getting
intimidation.
intimidated. And
Mm.
then our neighbor is sitting right there in the chair, and when he's starting in, immediately when my ex started in, I just gave him the finger and said, "If this is gonna happen, you're gonna have to do it in front of him and show him how you really are."
Wow.
And, and I'm thinking, when you get to that point, you have that point of where one of us is gonna make it out, And, I remember after everything cooled down, about a few days later, my mom, she picks me up from work, and I go over to a friend of the family's house, and I said, "I'm ready to leave. I had enough." My daughter was safe, and, they got our cat, and, they moved my stuff out. And, about like a couple weeks later, I contacted my uncle who was living in, like I said before, down in Southern Ohio. And I said, "Look, I'm leaving him. Can I stay with you?"
Yeah. How did he respond?
He said, "Okay." And we got to talking about it a little bit like a year later. And he was mentioning something to a friend of his and said, "Look, I got to move my niece or I'm going to need bail money."
Right. Because he's like, this is going badly. If she's calling me, she needs to get out of there.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking my uncle, he was openly gay, but he was also someone you did not wanna mess with. He was also a person where he had no problem beating your ass if he needed to. I mean, he was a tough guy, but considering the era that he came from, where it wasn't safe to be gay, he had to be tough,
Right.
you
And he
know?
sounds like the only person that's really supporting you. Your uncle is like, listen, like, I'm going to help her because I don't want her to be stuck in that situation.
Yeah, but yeah, I had that realization that and I kept a journal the entire time, writing down all these incidents. That way, just in case of, say, I ended up in the ICU or ended up dead, people would know what was going on. And that way, he couldn't do it to anyone else.
Yeah. I think that's another thing outsiders don't get. You're constantly confused about what's happening, and
Yeah,
you're always waiting for that person you first met to show up again.
yeah. But yeah, I remember just thinking, this is gonna end me. And then I remember there was, like, an incident back in it was, like, a year before I finally left. It was, like, that spring, like, 2010. Someone got stabbed in my apartment complex and was in the ICU at the hospital I was doing my clinicals at, and my family, they thought he finally did it and thought that, I was in the ICU.
So it's kind of like everybody did in hindsight, everybody kinda knew something wasn't going right.
Yeah, yeah, and I keep on it's like I sat there and said, I never once told anybody what was going on, they just figured it out on their own. I'm here trying to keep up his image because, he wasn't like that all the time, and I would have to say the one thing I would say to people, he's not like that all the time is not a good enough reason to stay. I mean, just wanting the bare minimum of just act like a decent human is not a reason to, you
That's a
know
very good point.
and that's what I would tell people. I said, "Look, the minute he puts a hole in your wall, the minute you try and get close to him and he shoves you, it's not gonna get better from there because now he thinks he can do it. That it's okay. It's better just to say, 'Leave.'" It is really better, but then again, also, hindsight's also 20/20 too,
Right.
and the thing is, when it comes to that, we kinda gaslight ourselves a little bit and say we minimize it. We try to tell ourselves, "Oh, he was just having a bad day. He didn't shove me that hard. Oh, it's just a small hole in the wall. We could patch it up." You know? You
Yeah, he was
know?
just so angry or he was so neglected or his mom was not there or whatever the thing is, it's like we can always make an excuse.
Yeah, like, I mean, his mom was a teen mom, and his mom also had her issues too. But, that's not an excuse.
Right.
I mean, and I actually do get along with his mom. I mean, I have no issue with his family. It's not her fault her son's a complete turd. And that's a personal opinion, but you know, we'll go with it.
Yeah.
But that's not her fault. He made that decision to be one. One of my best friends in high school, he was a grade under me, and I didn't find out later that he was basically living by himself trying to keep the rent up on a place because his mom was in and out of prison for being a crackhead,
Yeah.
and here he is. He's a responsible guy, he's got a family, his son that he had at 17 years old, he has his first grandbaby, I mean, and he's a responsible guy, and he's had a worse life,
Yeah.
being in
It
and
can
out of
really
foster
seem
care.
that way. But
Yeah,
one thing I've learned is that narcissism, a lot of times it's a wound. It doesn't necessarily mean that the mom did anything. It's just how it's perceived
yeah,
by the son or daughter, right?
yeah, yeah, and I mean, I I guess I'm just to the point where if someone has empathy and say they've been through the worst parts of life, they will not inflict that on another person, and that's the key component with these people. They want everyone to have empathy for them, but they don't have it for anyone else,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember he used to get angry over the commercials that would come on between during a station break with the show, and it was like, "This is far beyond your control,"
Yeah.
and just little things like that, and I remember the one time, and I actually discussed this in my video one of my videos about one of his rages, and there was some cereal that was on sale at the grocery store, and his grandma offered to pick us up some just because she picked up the wrong kind of cereal. And I'm watching this, and when he's going through this rage, I take my daughter into the back bedroom and put on some cartoons for her so she doesn't have to see it.
Yeah.
He's kicking this box of cereal around, cussing about his grandma. Yeah, over a box of cereal. And I looked right at him and I said, it was a common mistake. There's no need to have a meltdown like that over it. And it's like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. He started in all that. And I'm like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
And I I I do kind of, in a way, kind of laugh because if you see it, it looks ridiculous. It just looks like, what's wrong with you? You know, why are you getting so upset over a mistake?
Yeah, but that's, like, behind closed doors. What did you notice when he was, like, with people? Did you ever witness his, like, disappointment?
No, not really. Um, when he was ever trying to impress strangers, you couldn't ask for a much more decent guy. He was really putting on a good show, helpful, you know, he was good at faking knowledge, and I notice a lot of narcissists are good at doing that.
Yeah. So all the people they feed off of.
Yeah, exactly. But I noticed now, I mean, his flying monkey across the hall treated his girlfriend just as badly, so the mask kinda came off was really off with the flying monkey because the flying monkey would always side with him. But over time, with neighbors that he tried to be friends with, he would still try to put on that image, but by that time, they figured him out. And, around certain family members, like around his mom and his sister, he was the greatest guy ever, appreciative, loving, caring. But when we were alone, it was just like, what was I dealing with? I mean, you went from being loving, caring, sweet, talking to me like I'm a person, to treating me less than a slave, to being essentially being Satan at this point. And, I came across like several memes that describe a narcissist. And one, two of them that I really do like is one, a narcissist wants the authority of a king, but the accountability of a toddler. And then another one, if the devil can't get to you, he will send you a narcissist.
Feel like that's what you were saying when you were talking about warfare
Yeah,
there. It's kinda like you're in this battle, and it's really lonely because you're protecting an image while they're slandering your name. So to everyone else, it's like you're the problem instead of
yeah,
it being them.
yeah. And I also noticed, like, say with this flying monkey across the hall, I kind of look at him as many way like a double agent, and in some ways they are. Flying monkeys will sometimes play both sides,
They will,
and
especially when it's like family systems. Then
yeah.
you're like, they'll be nice to you, but it it's just confusing a lot of the time.
Well, I mean, it was kind of funny because my ex contacted me back in 2021. And what it was, I found out that, he almost died, due to years of chronic drug and alcohol abuse. He went into liver failure, and he only has, like, 25% usage of his liver.
I was gonna ask you, was there any substance use?
Even psychologists will say that substance abuse doesn't cause abuse. You know, it may exaggerate it, but it's not the root cause.
Yeah, well, they never get to deal with whatever they're
Yeah,
going through because 'cause they're always escaping from it. So
yeah,
it's everything. Think about all the, like, depression, anxiety, anger, it's just building.
yeah, and, he was telling me, and he again, when he apologized, he minimized it, still minimized it.
What did it sound like?
"I'm sorry I was an a I don't do drugs and alcohol anymore, and the neighbors across the hall, my friends, couldn't stand seeing anyone happy."
Okay, is this minimized or is this delusion?
I read that apology, and I was just like, "That is the most half-assed, backhanded apology ever." And I'm thinking, like, who do you think you're fooling?
They're so used to being able to turn on the charm and fool everybody that and think about the fact that you're constantly questioning, like, "Was it me? Did I do this wrong?"
Yeah,
They live for that.
and I'm just like, I'm thinking, "I was with you for 3 years. I know how this ends, okay? You're not fooling anyone."
Yeah, but what did you do? Did you respond?
I responded back, I sat there and said, "I hope you're doing well. I'm sorry to hear about your hospital visit," and was very showed him some kindness even though I really wanted to say, "Well, I guess you're not invincible now, are you?"
I get it, because he really thought he was.
Yeah. How's the drugs and alcohol working out for you? You know? And, I found that out, and he was also blaming his current supply that he got with right after me for all the drug use, and I'm thinking, "I wouldn't have tried pills if it wasn't for you, okay? I wouldn't have done all that crap if it wasn't for you. I mean, yeah, I made the dumb decision to do it, but you introduced it. You brought it into the house."
Yeah, and I don't think people really understand the power of coercion.
Yeah, like, "Oh, here, snort this Percocet, you'll feel better," or "Snort
Yeah.
this Oxy, you'll feel better." And really, I was looking back at that too, and I was like, he was trying to, and I don't know how it happened, and I don't know, but even though I did try those, I never developed a dependency. And I don't know if it's something in my genetics that says, "Okay, you're not gonna be dependent on this," or if I just had that mindset of, "I'm not gonna be dependent on this."
Possibly could be both, but more importantly, the mindset,
Yeah,
because you have coping skills, you've survived other things, like, because of those things, you're able to make a different choice. A lot of times people don't have the emotional intelligence, they don't have coping skills, and then you have a genetic component on top of that,
yeah,
then we'll see the
yeah,
substance use continue.
yeah, and it's like, again, I'm not proud of that moment either, There could have been I could have got a hold of a bad pill and I wouldn't be talking to you right now, or I would be in a permanent catatonic state, you know, for life. And, I also think about it this way. It's just like, well, what made that situation so different? And that I didn't develop the dependency like he did and his flying monkey across the hall. I mean, was it because I didn't do it every day? Was it because, you know, I just looked at it as like a recreational thing or what? My uncle on my mom's side, and I think that's kind of like where I kind of developed that mindset too. He had a crack addiction for like 10 years. And we're talking, he lost everything. He had a great job down in South Carolina. I think he did like HVAC or something like that along those lines. And him and my aunt, they were saving up to buy a house, and he went through their savings, like over like 20 grand in their savings. And my cousin, who's 6 months older than I am, she had money that she earned from babysitting in her jewelry box, and he stole that from her too.
Yeah.
And it took, my cousin a long time to get over it as well. Because yeah, you're doing that to your kid, that really affects them. And now her little brother, uh, I found out because I actually have, my cousin's wife on my Facebook page, and, I found out, when they moved out to Oregon, when my uncle's wife finally divorced him, he was living up there, and he did 18 months for heroin possession. And then, when he got clean, came over here, met someone, they got married, had a couple of kids. He had a good job, and his wife is a nurse. He ended up getting addicted to crack and is unable to hold a job because of that crack addiction. And it's kind of funny how things turned out. My cousin, went to college, got her degree in psychology, has a good life, but yet her little brother, on the other hand, is a crackhead.
Yeah, it really depends. So, like, years ago, they did this twin study and they separated twins. The people that they adopted them out to didn't know, but they separated them. And what they found was that some of the twins drank and became alcoholics, like their biological parents, and some didn't. It just depends. So, with the genetic component makes it probable, right? But then there are so many safeguards. And sometimes it's like having somebody at home, like people will have kids or pets, and then they'll be like, I can't make these decisions and they can fight through. Or
Yeah.
other people, it's like their brain is missing something that cocaine or crack
Yeah.
fills.
We were talking about and, because me and we were talking about this too, my boyfriend, and, he was actually showing me something along the lines of it's something with the neurotransmitters that certain spots of it will respond to certain drugs. Like you might have one that responds strongly to a stimulant, one that responds strongly to an opioid, one to cigarettes, tobacco, marijuana.
Yeah.
You know, you have like, and it just depends on which component is activated. So, and that's funny too. We also got to talking about that as well. Your people that are mostly like curious about how drugs are will be the ones to smoke weed, will be the ones to try psychedelics, maybe a little ecstasy, just out of curiosity. And those people are not hardwired to be addicts. They're just curious to see what those substances are, and they'll usually just stick with those substances. And then there's the minute they smoke or snort heroin, they're addicted and hitting up the fentanyl.
Yeah. And I've seen stories where people have done cocaine recreationally and, they lived their whole lives. One guy in particular did it with friends on weekends. Then he came across a big settlement of money. It was like 180 grand. And he blew it all because then he started
Yeah,
smoking crack. And within months, he lost everything that he built. So
yeah,
it's just different, like you said, different parts of the brain. And
yeah,
certain people will get addicted, but I've never seen anybody beat crack though. Like, I mean, I'm not
yeah.
saying that they can't get clean after, but I've never seen people just recreationally use that and it work
Well,
out.
basically, I kinda think of like a Chappelle show, Tyrone Biggums.
Yeah,
I mean, that is a caricature of a crackhead. I've never tried crack, never wanted to, because I seen what it did to my uncle, and I seen that it basically destroyed his life. Now he's been close to, like, 30 years clean,
yeah,
and, he'll tell people his story.
that's great.
He has to go to NA meetings, and he goes there mainly because he said if he didn't, he would get bored and probably know where the nearest crack house is at.
Yeah.
And he doesn't wanna go that ongoing struggle, he doesn't wanna go and do that to himself again.
Sometimes narcissists bank on the fact that they think you'll get addicted because then
Yeah,
if you do, you won't police how they do it. Like, it's one thing to party and drink and,
yeah.
do whatever, but once they start wanting to do that every single day, and then you're like, it becomes a problem, then you're the problem.
Well, it became really scary because I remember, towards the end when I finally left, bath salts had just hit the scene, and I'm not gonna lie, I did them too, but I did not do them to the extent he was doing them. He was doing them to the extent where he was hallucinating, and, the flying monkey across the hall and his girlfriend were doing them from days on out, and I step outside, and they step outside at the same time to take out the trash, and they look like something out of The Walking Dead. Like, I mean, her face was all their faces were all gaunt and hair all dried out, and I thought about, "Do I need to check you guys for a pulse to make sure you're still breathing?"
Yeah, it looks that bad.
Yeah, and when that came on the scene, and even though, yeah, I did them a couple of times, but I didn't do it to the extent where I was hallucinating and seeing stuff. I remember the one time he was high on them so bad that he kept me in the back bedroom the entire time because he thought that there was a SWAT team out in the living room and that people were putting cameras up through our floor.
Yeah.
Like, he was really hallucinating that bad, and it wasn't until 4 o'clock in the morning when it finally wore off, I was able to get up and go get a drink of water because I was so dehydrated because I didn't know what he was gonna do if I got up and got something to drink.
because he's so, like, out of it.
Yeah, and I actually brought that up to him. I said, "Look, you were so messed up on bath salts that you were hallucinating really bad." And it was like when those came on the scene, it got really scary.
Yeah.
'Cause, I mean, there was actually a girl in my hometown that, she was, like, 14 years old, and she was geeked out on bath salts that actually stabbed her sister and was trying to eat her. There was Yeah, yeah, there she was so messed up on 'em that we had a family friend of ours who was the paramedic on duty that went and saw that and simply said he said, "I can't do this anymore." This it traumatized him to where he decided not to renew his licensure and said, "I can't not with someone trying to eat a baby like that." And he was like and it messed him up for a while, which seeing that would mess anyone up.
Yeah, and I want you to see how narcissists continue these patterns sometimes because most people think it's because they were high that they did this. It's because they were drinking. So like for you, you've been researching, so you
Yeah,
know different. But for the person who hasn't done that, because it's
yeah,
not common knowledge, right? They don't know. They
yeah,
just think, because when I met him, he wasn't drunk, he wasn't high, right? So he's like this because of the drugs versus
yeah.
the mask came off.
And even a narcissist, if they have a substance abuse issue, will blame it on drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And we all know that's not the case, and to be honest with you, when he had a few drinks in his system, he was tolerable. You could sit down and, it kept him calm and pacified to where, okay, he's got a few beers in his system. He's not gonna go into a rage tonight, so we're clear there, and just kind of, "Oh, he's getting ready to pass out now, okay. I can have some peace and quiet, read a book, maybe watch some TV, and not have to deal with it."
Yeah.
And that's what's going on in the person's mind is, "Okay, he's calmed down. I'm gonna have a peaceful night."
Yeah, it almost conditioned you to get him a drink. It's like, "Hey,"
Yeah.
because you're just happy that he's having a few and that he's not being abusive in that moment.
Yeah, like, "Oh, hey, I got your Steel Reserve in the fridge, have at
Yep.
it." I mean, yeah, and I mean, for the record, that Steel Reserve is, like, the nastiest stuff ever,
Oh
it
my
really
goodness.
is.
You just gave me like a flashback to college because
Yeah, it's what they did was all the normal beer, like the Budweiser, the Michelob, the Busch, they bottled that up and they just like, "Oh, we have a bunch of sediment here. Steel Reserve. Here we go."
yes.
I
Agreed.
mean, Old Milwaukee would probably be a better alternative to Steel Reserve.
Oh my goodness, right. I get it.
Yeah,
You know, I think that when you're in it, you think the person hates you so much. It feels like they just hate you. But the truth is that they actually hate themselves so much,
yeah,
And that's how people are able to check out. If you think about it, like as you're, growing up and everything, the more you care about yourself, the less likely you are to do some things. I'm not saying people don't get addicted. We talked about the genetic component, but I'm saying most people who have awareness and knowledge, the more they get, the less substance use that we see.
yeah, and it's like I said, I guess I remember the one time, and this was kind of and I it was speaking of, like, people doing crack and everything. The one time he was smoking crack in my bathroom, and I was just like, "What smells like burnt plastic?" And
Yeah.
I go in there and he comes out and for one, immediately he was calm. I knew he was doing something. Both him and his flying monkey were doing it in my bathroom. And he left, the flying monkey left, and he was like, "Oh, me and we got some crack." I looked at him, I go, "What?" I
Right.
like I was about ready to lose my shit. I just wanted to beat on him a few times to see if he feels anything,
Yeah.
you know? But, when he was doing that night, he looked right at me and said, no, 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 I don't want you to think of it like that." And I'm like, "You were smoking crack in my bathroom.
Yeah.
What do you want me to think?" And he was like, "Think of the movie Wonderland. You mean that movie that was about that gang out in California that got bludgeoned to death?
Right.
That's supposed to give me the warm and fuzzies about that drug."
But isn't that just typical narcissist too? Like,
Yeah.
don't see it for what's happening. Like, always gaslighting, always wanting you to repaint the picture and see
Yeah.
it in the way that they look the best.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I yelled at him. I said, "Look," and this was to the point, like, about 2 years before I left, I said, "I can't stop you from doing what you're doing, but you're not gonna do it here, you know? You keep that shit out of my place. I don't wanna be around it." And basically, whenever he would do stuff like that, he got the point
Yeah.
and said, I'll go do it somewhere else." Doesn't make it right either way, but keep that shit out of people's places,
Yeah.
you
And if
know?
you out of everything that you've been through, if you had to tell somebody just some life advice, if they were walking the same path or going through the same thing you had been through, what would you say?
I would say, I would love to say that I would love to give some actual life advice about it, but I'm going to have to sit there and say when the mask really starts to crack before it finally just shatters and you see what these people are, as soon as you get that funny feeling that something is not right, listen to it. I wish if I would have listened to that voice in the back of my mind back in 2008 and saying, "This person seems too good to be true. He's not even attempting to get to know you. He's telling you all about himself and not asking you any questions. There's something wrong here." I would, the life advice I would give to somebody is to listen to your gut instinct. If there is something in the back of your mind, call it, your higher self, call it if you believe in God, the Holy Spirit, nudging you saying, there's nothing right here. You need to get out. And, because for one, it's not, those things are not to say, oh, you're doing great, you're doing awesome. Those things are meant to put a foot up your ass when you need it.
Yeah.
Is the best way to say it. And I'm going to say, and that's just the advice I would give. If there is something in the back of your mind telling you something is not right and your gut is agreeing with you, don't listen to your heart. The heart doesn't know what it's talking about.
Right.
Listen to your gut and mind.
Right. So trust your gut because you have the feelings that you need, which is
Yeah.
even what we teach people because that butterflies that we were always taught was like how you know you're in love, we know now is emotional dysregulation.
Yeah.
But back then we didn't know that.